you get reminded of your mortality by the instilling of ashes, typically on your forehead. But of course, because of COVID-19, they were put on your head today. And
how so? How did they do it in COVID-19?
Well, that was it. You mean before COVID?
No, I mean with COVID. How does the priest put the ashes on the forehead when you're not supposed to have?
Well, no, that's the point. They don't do the forehead.
They don't do it.
They put it on your head.
On the top of the head. Oh, I see.
On the top of the head, and he uses a little. It looks like a rosin bag filled with the ashes, and he kind of shakes it on there.
On the top of your hair.
Yeah.
Did you have it done, Michael?
Yes, I did.
And was it like crowded with a lot of people coming out?
Well, of course, they have to maintain social distancing at the church. Now, as an aside, my usual parish that I go to has the pastors come up with this common sense social distancing in mass, which essentially means that we're in every other pew and almost no one wears a mask. But that's most other parishes, they have a pretty heavy mask protocol, which is fine. At least the churches are open.
Okay. I mean, I suppose that they could do it outside, right? Or not?
Well, they were trying that in some places, but considering today was
right, not a good day. Yeah. I know that one of the synagogues that I've been a member of, they're holding their minions outside in a park, have been throughout this whole time. I don't know if they're doing it today, but
even winter in Boston. Right?
Oh yeah, I mean, with Jewish law, you're supposed to have a minion every day.
Right.
We believe that there has been a minion every day since Moses. Not a single day has gone by where there hasn't been a minion in the world. And a minion is 10 circumcised bar mitzvahed men coming together and holding a prayer session. Of course, with Reform and Conservative, it includes women, which is fine.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a day since creation that this hasn't happened. It's very important. So during COVID, they're doing it outside in a park with they put the chairs, social distance. It looks like a Biden rally, with the circles and everybody's.
Well, is it a minion if Chuck Schumer and Jerry Nadler get together praying for Trump to leave office?
Well, if they get 8 other Jews, I guess it is. I mean, you have to have 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that is a minion, isn't it? Actually, that's a great point. So
maybe that's where Dominion came from.
That's where who?
Dominion.
Probably, yeah. Dominion,
yeah.
I mean, it's probably the word minion is probably Latin, because second century, first century Judaism, Jews were known back then to be great polyglots. They could speak Hebrew and Aramaic, which was the more common language, but they also were known to know Greek and probably Latin. A good kind of working knowledge of Latin, and that kind of continued right through the Middle Ages and right up to maybe even modern times. That this is one of the specialties that Jews could speak many languages. They just valued that, and so they would often serve as diplomats for European princes and kings and dukes to go to other countries because they knew the language, and they, plus being a Jew, they could connect with Jews in those other countries and have like a, kind of a set group of people that would help them, and that oftentimes would also know the prince. So they
was original networking thing.
Yeah, and that they were good diplomats, and they were good business people, of course, traders, and they were able to kind of offer the connecting sinews between sovereign nations and principalities, so that people could communicate with each other because they had that kind of extra diplomatic ability and whatnot. So what's going on right now with the virus?
Well, before the virus, we did get the news that Rush Limbaugh died.
Oh, I didn't get that news.
I just saw that on one of the sites. I presume it was today. I can go back and check.
I did not hear that. That's he was a great pioneer of talk radio. I would say.
Yes, he was 70 years old. He was really the guy that made it big. Yeah, it was actually this morning.
Okay.
He did have stage 4 lung cancer, which is the most common cancer death. So
yeah, I mean that's a tough one. Nobody gets over that. I mean that's that's a hard diagnosis.
Yeah.
And I don't know, was he a smoker? I mean, not that it matters.
Well, he
but
probably was, as many of these guys were back in the day.
Yeah.
There really aren't too many people that still smoke now, but depending on how much damage you do at the time.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, smoking, this is before the day when there was a Surgeon General and, there was, I mean, back in the 1950s, there used to be commercials with doctors endorsing cigarettes. I think they show a doctor with a white smock, smoking a Camel. They taste wonderful. Right. The taste can't be beat because people didn't know, either they didn't know.
Yeah, well, of course, some of them kind of knew, and even the guy that ended up being my doctor for many years, when I was just a teenager, he smoked, I remember this, he smoked large because that supposedly had the best filter or something. But,
right.
Obviously, that went away.
Oh, I remember the cigarette commercials. I'm old enough to know that, with the Marlboro Man and all of it. I mean, that just that all disappeared.
Well, it's funny about those commercials. Being in the music industry for some time, I met, there were always the same go-to guys and women for whether it was sidemen for instruments or vocal. And they developed a niche. And one of the guys that died a number of years ago, more my parents' age, frankly, was a guy named Ralph Sterling, who did all the cigarette commercials. And I had heard this from my parents. So my parents were having something at their house, and I'd never met Sterling before. And I knew about this connection. So he walked up to shake my hand. And I said, "Have a commander, welcome aboard." And it took, because I knew he did that commercial. And apparently he did a bunch of others. So the thing that killed that, of course, was when they stopped doing cigarette commercials on TV, his business dried up. He had to find some other niche.
He was out of a gig.
Yeah. But it was the same guys doing the cigarette commercials.
That's amazing. Well, they were creative. I remember that we used to, they did a lot of interesting stuff with those commercials. Parliament, Pall Mall, I remember all of that. So, so here we are with the rollout of the vaccine. I know that in my family and in my circle, people are just anxious to get the vaccine. They're lining up for it. My mother has already gotten it. She went to the local pharmacy down where she is, but here at Fenway Park, they're doing it. They're doing it at Gillette Stadium with the New England Patriots, and the rule is that if you are over 75 or have 2 pre-existing conditions that qualify, you can get the vaccine. And if you drive someone to the vaccine site, you can also get the vaccine.
That's right.
So I don't know how they're doing it in your state, but that's what's going on in Massachusetts.
It's not quite as organized. There are, let's put it this way, you have to work to find out the information.
Right. But what about it? I mean, maybe it's because of my background in skepticism when it comes to political and social issues, my conspiracy background, quite frankly, my study of the conspiracy going back 20 years. I am skeptical. I feel like I'm being pressured by my family to get it, and I probably will get it. But before I do so, I am thinking about contacting my lawyer and having a last will and testament made out.
Well, you have every right to be skeptical, and I'll tell you why. There are a number of things wrong with this vaccine. The most fundamental one has to do with the pregnancy of women.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that the issue was raised by Mike Yaden, who was originally very high up in Pfizer.
Mm-hmm.
And he resigned from the company. But one of the objections he came up with, which was pretty cogent, unfortunately, is that there was concern that if you target the spike protein of the virus, which is the basis of these vaccines, that is a very similar chemical to protein used in the human placenta.
Mm-hmm.
And he was dismayed that they really hadn't done much about this.
Hmm.
So I believe it was last week. Let me see the date on this. All right. Dr. Sarah Potts, a Milwaukee resident physician in radiant oncology, tweeted on January 28th that she was 14 weeks pregnant and fully vaccinated. Blah, blah, blah. Less than 2 weeks later, she miscarries in the second trimester, which is very rare.
Right. No, that's tough. Yeah, that's a
Dr.
long one.
Simone Gold, who's one of the founders of the Frontline Doctors, had said from the beginning that women who are pregnant or women who ever want to be pregnant should not take this vaccine.
Okay. No, that's important.
And the
Now, what about the claim that it might also affect female fertility?
Well, here, that's exactly right. I mean, whether it's fertility or the ability to go to term, there are some issues with this. And moreover, Yaden raised the possibility that this could be a permanent situation, that you're now storing this unnatural antibody, or the blueprint for that, if you will, and they just don't know. One of the
is this all of the vaccines, or is it one of the specific vaccines?
Well, I believe,
we just
and
don't
I
know.
was trying to check this before the show. I believe they all target that spike protein, but I don't want to swear to that.
Okay.
I know that the ones that are approved, which are Moderna and BioNTech, Pfizer, do target the spike protein.
Okay.
But beyond that, there is a litany of issues with people dying shortly after receiving this vaccine.
Right. There is a number of them. You mentioned one last time we talked. This man who just died at the Javits Center in New York, and now there's another case where this guy went home and he died, I think, a day or two later.
See, the problem with these has been that you get tired of hearing, well, it wasn't a vaccine.
Hmm.
Well, then what was it? If you do an autopsy on someone, official autopsy doesn't say it wasn't this as the finding. They have to give an affirmative finding. But somehow, even though autopsies are supposed to be public knowledge, of course, if they don't give out the name, you don't know whose it is. But it's been very mysterious how this has been handled. And it's the same thing, cancel culture. If you raise even the point that there may be a problem here, you're part of the cancel culture.
So then there's no official or even unofficial stats being kept with regard to people dying in a reasonable proximity to having gotten the vaccine.
There's a significant number of these cases, a few hundred, with very poor explanations, frankly.
Okay. And is that a statistic that I could see?
Yeah, there's the site that's done the best cataloging of this, and they get their information from various sources, is LifeSite News,
Okay.
which, by the way, has been permanently banned from YouTube.
Oh.
So
well, that tells you something right there, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, and if you see the videos that got them banned, it was ridiculous. I mean, it was.
Yeah, I get it. This subject is being it's kind of verboten. I mean, I'm even nervous talking about it with you right now on YouTube.
Yeah,
we have to be very careful about it for reasons that I find strange. I mean, look, they say they've got violation of community standards. I understand that. I mean, I've been a radio talk show host in various stations for years, and I understand I'm working for a business and I have to observe certain standards. I want to anyways.
Right,
and I understand that. And that means you don't attack people based on race, of course, and all of that, and criticize that and get into that. But a question like this is a medical question. This is a health question. I mean, this is like when we've talked about the nature of the last election. That's not attacking anybody. That is a political question that needs to be aired publicly, and yet that's forbidden. And the fact that, and that's bad enough, but this in a way to try to censor legitimate medical opinions on this question, that's much worse, because now we're talking about life and death. We're talking about how someone's going to be affected. And
well, let me go through just a few of these. There's a list of about, I'm not going to read all of them, 20 suspicious incidents. 29 elderly people died in Norway shortly after receiving the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
10 deaths in a German palliative care situation occurred within hours, in 4 days after receiving the vaccine. It was termed a, quote, coincidence. 24 seniors at a nursing home in Syracuse were reported to have died from COVID despite having been vaccinated a couple of weeks before.
And that's Syracuse, New York.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, these are all in LifeSite News. 4,500 cases of COVID-19 in Israel occurred in patients after they had received the first dose.
49,000. How many did you say?
4,500.
4,500 cases. Okay.
After they received the first dose, 375 of which had to be hospitalized. Before the vaccine, the death toll in Gibraltar, the small British colony, was only 16 before the vaccine campaign.
Right.
Within 2 months after the vaccine was deployed, there were 53 deaths.
This kind of goes to why a lot of healthcare workers are refusing the vaccine,
yes.
doesn't it? I mean, even like I understand there are prison guards and people in prison are refusing the vaccine, and prisoners. And that I was watching, I think one of the big three, I think it was probably Lester Holt is the one I usually watch. They're talking about people, and they're interviewing people, I think in the Hispanic neighborhood, who were refusing the vaccine. And as if this is something that they're ignorant and that they're, they don't know what they're doing. But the fact of the matter is that people are refusing it. And that's a growing thing, isn't it?
Well, do you find it eerily similar when I produce this litany of all these items, and it's the sort of the same reaction that they did with the voting irregularities? Well, that's BS. No, we didn't do it.
Right. I mean, in other words, anybody that questions a particular narrative is denounced, is mocked, is banned, is shunned. This is, it does have that kind of look to it, doesn't it?
Well, and I can understand, I'm stretching the word understanding here, why you might do that in a situation of election when you're so in favor of your guy and you hate the other guy. But it's pretty hard for me to put together a reason why people, whether the liberal, conservative, or whatever in the news media, would want to suppress this kind of information.
No, it's horrible, because we're talking about health here. This isn't politics. This is life and death. This is women possibly dealing with potential, I'm not saying they are, but potential questions of fertility, pregnant women,
which were never addressed.
And yeah, I mean, this is, I want to see the stats on that, but I mean, I wonder how much of that is really happening. And I'm not saying it is, but I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about that over women in my own life that I know. That
Milwaukee case was, again, they can always say it's a coincidence, but the problem is that miscarriages hardly ever occur that late. Now, maybe this.
Now, I want to see the stats on how often that's happened, because that's a big one. That's a major story. Mike, meanwhile, as we're looking at this emerging information about the vaccine, it is now being reluctantly acknowledged that the vaccine is dropping all over the world. It's dropping in this country. There are less hospitalizations. There are less people contagious. There are less deaths.
You mean the virus is dropping?
The virus, I mean. Yeah. Say thank you. What is now? What I think they're accounting that to is a combination of the vaccine itself and people sheltering. Even though there was an interesting article in today's paper that I think it wasn't a New York Times, but it was a major paper, which compares California and Florida, and two states that took an extremely different approach to the whole thing, the whole lockdown and all of the rest. And yet the results are basically the same in both states. But I guess that given everything we know, what do you account for this sudden but demonstrable drop in cases?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things going on. There's going to be some herd immunity. There's going to be, and not just herd immunity, there's going to be individual immunity. In any viral outbreak, the way your immune system is supposed to work is you get exposed to the virus and you either get sick or you produce antibodies that keep you from being acute.
Mm-hmm.
This is what happens with everything. So despite their best efforts to keep people from being exposed, you can't stop the exposure. I mean, the classic example is they would do curves of Florida versus California. Mm-hmm. Florida had almost no lockdowns. California had 1,000% lockdown.
Right.
And all that happened in California was you delayed the inevitable.
In other words, it just came. It's like the difference between Sweden and maybe Germany or Norway or some comparable country. Sweden did not do the lockdown, and the other country did a complete lockdown, and yet the results are basically the same. It didn't. There's no real demonstrable difference. In fact, Sweden is not one of the worst countries in Europe. I think the worst country hit in Europe, I think, is Britain, and they've done a complete lockdown.
And they keep making it more and more and more of a lockdown, and they get worse and worse results.
So in other words, if it's going to come, it's going to come. You can lock down.
How it works.
You can take precautions, which we all are doing. I mean, I certainly am. But if you're going to get it, you're going to get it. I mean, you have to just try to improve your immune system and stay healthy and just try to reduce your exposure to it. But
I mean, have you noticed? You're old enough to remember other epidemics.
Sure.
No one ever told you to run and hide. I mean, about as far as it ever got.
Well, I mean, in fairness, though, I don't know if those other epidemics were quite as contagious or quite as deadly as this one. I mean, I don't think that the Hong Kong flu of 1968-69 was quite. I remember it. It wasn't quite as bad as this. Or am I wrong?
Well, no, I mean, the Asian flu of 57 and 58, percentage-wise, based on the population of the United States at the time, there were 100-something thousand deaths to a population of about 173 million at the time. And as we discussed on this program, I don't believe the death statistics. I think they're higher.
Right. We've talked about that, how they've ramped up the deaths. And I think now they're stopping that now, maybe now that you know who is you know where in this government. Yeah. They're suddenly deciding to go back to a normal study of it. Well, now, back in 1958 with the Asian flu, was there any public policy to try to nothing?
No, and there was no public policy with the Hong Kong flu other than don't French kiss someone that has it.
Okay.
I mean, really, that was about as far as it went. But this idea of lockdowns, by the way, came from, and here's the other, you start connecting these dots.
Right.
the modeling that came out of an institute that's supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation came up with these models showing that the disease is going to spread and kill 300 trillion people within 5 seconds. And the people that wanted to believe that started this lockdown situation. And it was just all bad science. One of the guys who believed it was Fauci. The other one was Debbie Birx, who was very tied in with these people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just the old story. Anytime you mix politics with healthcare, the result is a disaster.
So now it's dropping. Why is it dropping? And what do you think? I mean, we're being told that on the one hand, that there's a new strain coming. It's going to be deadlier and more contagious. It's going to be here any day now, any week now. Is that what it is? Because I think that it has to do with this idea that they want to keep people, as you say, like vigilant and wearing the mask. And they're afraid. I mean, I'm being generous here. They're afraid that if people let the guard down, it's happening less, I'm going to go out now, I'm not going to bother, then that's going to result in a new surge.
Well, you're right, but here's the reasoning. Suppose you were space travel, or no. There was a science fiction story. I forget the name of it, where the government told you that something overnight happened to the environment, and you have to wear an oxygen-assisted respirator and helmet all the time, or you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you go outside. So there's all these people walking around with these devices.
Right.
And somebody decides, I don't believe this. And to show you I don't believe this, he pulls the thing off, takes several breaths of air, sees that there's nothing wrong. The whole thing has been a government plot.
Right.
And then the people are confused that see him do this. Well, wait a minute. What's special about him that he can overcome this toxic environment? And then gradually another person takes off this helmet and another person. So they created a monster, and they're very unwilling to tame it. Okay? Far better to tell you, as if this is a secret, that coronaviruses mutate. Well, guess what? Everybody knows that. And how they can determine that one strain is worse than another, it's impossible. What's the criterion? What was the experiment, please, where you could show that this strain is worse than that strain?
But do you think we can
infect somebody with it?
Can we expect, though, another uptick, or do you think it's petering out?
I don't think so. And that would be the proof in the pudding. Okay, there's all these horrible things coming in, and you expect the curve to go up. I think they're just trying to scare people at this point.
Okay. And, by the way, I want to be clear here. Anybody listening and watching, we're not suggesting your opinion, and I'm also not suggesting that people go toss out their mask in the garbage quite yet.
Because
I certainly am not. In fact, in my family, they're already telling me to wear 2 masks and to put on this extra strength mask. So, I want to be clear.
Let's talk about that for a minute. Last week, it was reported that the CDC did a study showing that 2 masks are better than 1.
Right.
But what was neglected in the reporting by virtually all mainstream media was these tests were not done on human subjects.
Uh-huh.
They were done on dummies.
Dummies? What do you mean dummies? Not living like dolls?
No. These were plyometric heads that had built into them a pump.
So they weren't even alive. They were just...
No, it was a plyometric head.
That's crazy. That doesn't tell you anything.
No, it gets worse. That had in it a device that would spew out particles of potassium chloride. So they found that if you put on a mask and cinch it down very tight, and put on another mask and cinch it down very tight, you were really stopping the expelling of these KCl particles. The only fallacy is that plyometric dummies don't have to breathe.
Of course.
And you could not, on a human, put a mask down that tight. So the fact, A, that CDC would run such an absurd study, B, that the media would report it, leaving out the detail that it was not on humans, and it may not have been their fault completely, because as I put in my article, you had to get about 600 words deep into the study before you found out that it was done on plyometric dummies.
Yikes, that's craziness.
So the level of science here is just laughable.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. So meanwhile, we have Congresswoman Jacobs interviewed on Brian Stelter's program, MSNBC, where she's calling for the established by Congress to establish a truth commission.
Oh, yes.
I mean, this is sort of like what they did in South Africa after apartheid, of truth and reconciliation. And with the purpose being, of course, that they want to have people drop a dime on a Trump supporter.
Yeah.
Basically. I mean, here in Massachusetts, right after Trump was elected, we had Attorney General Maura Healey put up a hotline. You know, it didn't last because there was public outrage back then. Now I'm not sure there would be such public outrage. Basically, to drop a dime on a Trump supporter. If you know a Trump supporter, you better call us. We're here to investigate, you know.
Well, I think what came out of this, beyond the obvious, is that, and maybe you concluded this also, there are many people who would feel comfortable under a fascist environment.
Yes. Well, that's what I mean. I mean, back in 2016, when Trump was just elected, there was still enough people conscious of basic civil liberties and basic function, including liberals, that didn't fly, even in Massachusetts. It just, it was an embarrassment, and she dropped it within a few days. But I think that if they do that now, I wonder, and now that they have framed all, I assumedly 75 million Trump supporters as terrorists and insurrectionists because of the Capitol incursion, regardless of what that was about. And there were some big questions around that. Now people, I think to a very large extent have bought this, including legitimate people. I've seen this on my Twitter account, people that, this is almost becoming gospel now. Well, you're an insurrectionist, you're a terrorist.
The ones you call legitimate people seem to be very comfortable with the notion of an authoritarian situation and don't even think about, really, what if it were the shoe were on the other foot? They very much like this monolithic environment. And this is the academic mentality to the max, that it was bad enough when I was in college in the 60s, for goodness sake, that you didn't really want to disagree with the revealed wisdom of the professor. But now it's just infinitely worse. That there's one particular train of thought that's allowed, and there are people that are remarkably comfortable with this, because if you think about it, it's a substitute for having a brain. This is exactly what you're supposed to know and think at all times. And
it goes into like the psychological issue of confirmation bias. I mean, I've been accused of that by people that are close to me. and maybe there's a little bit of that, but in the case, it's stretched to such a large extent now. And I think that this last phony impeachment was a perfect example, because there were so many flat out lies that were being told by the House managers right out in public. I mean, things that were completely false. And yet, people who want this to happen they're fine. They accept this stuff, on face value, and now they're talking about the insurrection. I mean, I just want to. By the way, I want to just touch on one little aspect of that without going too into something that could get me banned. Um, it's I think now been determined that Trump was accused of not calling out the National Guard in advance of this event and knowing information that there would be a possible threat to the Capitol. But the fact is that the Capitol is controlled by the Congress, not the president. And the person who is where the buck stops with the Capitol is Nancy Pelosi. She's the Speaker of the House. It is up to her to call out the National Guard if the building is threatened.
That's absolutely right.
In the same way that it's up to her or whoever.
And she was asked.
Well, this is just it. I mean, the Speaker decides everything to do with the Capitol. They decide what statues are on display at the Capitol. That is what Congress does. That's what the Speaker does. And apparently, the Sergeant at Arms, 2 or 3 days before the event, maybe a week before, was given information. I don't know if it was by the FBI or whomever, that indicated that they should call out the National Guard, that there was a potential threat to the Capitol. And he responded by saying that he didn't like the optics. He didn't like the way it would look, so that he would not do that. Now, who was he speaking for? He was obviously speaking for Nancy Pelosi. That's his boss. He's not in a position to.
Well, she had every interest in promoting this.
Well, that's my point. I mean, he was representing her when they said, no, we're not going to call out the National Guard. We're going to, because we don't like the way it looks, allegedly. That's the reason. And by the way, he stepped down the next day after the event. So he's out of the picture now. We don't even hear his testimony. Maybe they should have a truth commission to ask him to come in and testify. The point is that, President Trump and all of us supporters, we didn't gain anything by that. We lost. I mean, I was looking forward to that. You and I mean, on this show, we were talking about they're going to finally have the count in the Congress where evidence will be heard in 7 states. We finally had senators and House members committing to calling for this contestation in 7 states. And that what happens in the Constitution is that once that is done, then each state has up to 2 hours to present their evidence. And this has happened before. I mean, it happened in 2004 with Ohio, when Senator Barbara Boxer was joined by House Member McKinnon to contest the race there. And there was a hearing. And, it was public. The point is that this is the way the Constitution works. There was a feeling on the part of people like me and Trump supporters and other well-meaning people that we were finally going to hear whatever evidence was there in public, with the media, with the filming, with questions back and forth. Maybe we'd conclude that there wasn't any improprieties. Either way, we would finally see the public debate in the last venue that we could hope to have it happen. The media hadn't done it. The court system hadn't done it. So finally, the last resort, Congress itself. Right. And this was supposed to happen. And sure enough, the state of Arizona was called because it's done alphabetically. And Arizona was the first state to contest. And the contestation was made. And they were just starting to lay out the evidence. I watched it on television. It was stunning. It was amazing. They were presenting it. And then all of a sudden, the guy with the buffalo suit shows up and everything is shut down. Now, who gained from that? We never will. We're now never going to hear the evidence because
you make an eloquent case, but it's pretty obvious that the Trump side had nothing to gain from this so-called insurrection or riot or whatever it was. And Pelosi had everything to gain by not doing anything.
That's right.
But she has, you're talking about the Teflon individual. She is one of the most corrupt people in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
But she's had this tremendous ability to deflect criticism. You could go back on YouTube and still on YouTube and find videos of her being questioned by mainstream leftist-oriented media, questioning how her husband got all these no-bid contracts from the government and so on and so forth. And her reply was something like, I don't know what you're talking about.
That's like what Biden says, right, with his family, many of whom, by the way, are still making money.
To get away with it.
Yeah,
the only thing I can conclude is she got a lot on a lot of people because her father was renowned as the most corrupt mayor in the history of Baltimore. And believe me, that's saying something.
Yeah, and she's also one of the richest people in Congress, and her husband's vineyards and his wineries, they ban unions. I mean, we could take a whole look at her. But the point is that, Trump did not gain from this. The country did not gain from it. What happened is that the Congress reconvened at midnight when everyone's asleep and the media's gone, and they just gavelled Biden through, and there was no hearings. We were supposed to have states, 7 states. There was nothing. So, to claim that Trump was behind an insurrection, I mean, think of how idiotic that is. What was he thinking? Oh, we're going to send in the guys with the funny Halloween costumes. That's going to stop the certification and I'll still be president? I mean, think about the moronic. I mean, how stupid that is. That's so absurd.
It makes sense to these people.
I mean,
because they want to believe so much.
And we have serious people, like former Harvard professor Lawrence Tribe. I don't know if you've seen his.
Oh, he's not.
Oh my God! I mean, I get his tweets, and I respond to them. He talk about putting on a tin hat. I mean, it's a disgrace to Harvard that he would be out there. Well, and you got Robert B. Reich, former labor secretary, with his TikTok account, going with these absolute nutso conspiracy theories about the terrorists overthrowing Trump sent in insurrectionists. He's a murderer, and they're responsible for the deaths. I mean,
the difference is that they want to believe this narrative so much that it all fits. I mean, I'm telling you that if more horrific stuff came out on the vaccine, it wouldn't matter. I don't care if you could pile up thousands of bodies based on vaccine reactions. That would still be a coincidence and a conspiracy theory. And that is how these people think. I mean, on ACSH, which I've written for, and they have some good people, they occasionally have a column done by some academic medical statistician type who was arguing for the flat-out censorship of people that question the vaccine.
Oh, yeah.
And
they want to censor people who question.
Reasonable.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're big. I mean, you can't talk about global warming. I mean, this is all like, you're denying science, So, yeah.
Well, science can't exist in that kind of environment.
Of course, it's bad science.
That there was a miracle drug in Germany that was very effective against morning sickness in pregnant women. And it was highly touted in the late 1950s. And there were a few smartasses that were saying, well, wait a minute, we're observing some effects on our patients here. This may not be that great. And groundswell was starting to come out. But nonetheless, thalidomide was widely used in Germany.
Right.
And, the FDA loves taking credit for banning it in the United States. In fact, it wasn't really banned. There were hundreds of sample pills here. Depending on which history you want to believe, there were anywhere from 1 to 200 verified. Okay. If they weren't victims of thalidomide, they sure had the same symptoms at birth.
And ever since then, now Congress has passed laws that give immunity to drug companies that dispense these kinds of drugs. And
that was the only way they could do it on this vaccine, because it was approved as an experimental emergency approval.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I mean, this is, you're really bringing up a big point. I mean, I know that, I mean, even my own experience, there was this drug in the late 50s when I was born called DES.
Oh, yeah.
Which my mother took when she was pregnant with me. And I'm not affected by it, although I did have a little incident when I was a teenager that they say is related to it. Not to get into details, I'm fine. But women were, yeah, thank you. But women were very affected by it. Young women who were born with the mothers in terms of their reproductive systems, and there was the cancers and all kinds of stuff. And there was a lawsuit brought, I think, in the 1970s, like a class action suit, and basically Congress set up a system by which the companies involved in distributing this drug were immune, and that there would be a settlement that they could only get through this separate entity that was run by Congress, and they could only get X number, small amount, and that once they received the money, there would be a gag order. You can't criticize it anymore, can't talk about it. I don't even know if I should have mentioned it here. I mean,
well, I don't think YouTube is smart enough to know.
No, and I also think this is now public record. Everybody who's heard about DES. That's fine. It's not. It's been off the market probably for 40 years. I mean, it's not.
The point is that at least if they allowed contrary type discussion, and let's face it, there are numerous drugs. I've written about this multiple times that were FDA approved, only to be taken off the market.
Oh yeah.
A few years later, and it was only because of people observing and commenting on these reactions that sort of thing happened. So the notion of suppressing this information is just unbelievable.
It's unconscionable.
I mean, I don't know, other than the vaccine companies, really who's to gain from promulgating
what
this.
Is this a matter of money? I mean, the vaccine, they must be, I mean, Bill Gates and the vaccine, they probably are rolling in dough over this, aren't they?
Well, they certainly are not losing money on it. I think the thing was that Gates supports this big narrative, and I've always wondered why he and his wife would talk about, on the one hand, population control, and on the other hand, we've got to get vaccines out. Now, one would think that if you vaccinated all these poor, starving people in Africa, they wouldn't die. So that would be contraindicated for population control. On the other hand, if there's something in the vaccine that might cause a problem down the road, i.e. this placenta formation business, that would be a great way to depopulate the earth. And
yeah, especially if it's affecting women. I mean, obviously, I mean, this is, I don't know if we really can go any further with this topic, but it is an ugly one and it's a big one.
Oh, it is.
And it's getting out there. People are becoming aware of it and should be. And, I'm not here to say we shouldn't have the vaccine. I'm probably going to have it, and I'm probably going to have it soon. Yeah. But just we ought to at least. I would feel a lot
more comfortable if they started answering these questions.
Yes, we have to. It's just a matter of, as the saying goes, transparency.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We need to know the truth in all of its aspects, whatever it is. That's all. Anyways, Mike, what did you write about this week?
Well, it was a couple of quick takes on COVID. One was the mask thing, the CDC study, which I mentioned here. The other was the fact that Pfizer bailed on putting its vaccine into India because the Indian government wanted a few more studies done.
Okay,
and
good.
Some additional related material to that, but it was just a few updated observations on what's going on with COVID-19.
Okay, excellent. Well, listen, I think we've covered a lot. I'm nervous that we're going to lose the show, to tell you the truth. But here it is. The program is on YouTube live, but I'm also on Sprecher. I'm on about 7 or 8 other networks. You could get the list if you go to charlesmoscowitz.com. I'm on TikTok. I mean, you know, I'm trying to diversify and broaden the program. I'm on Minds and I'm on Rumble. I'm soon going to be on Gab. So, you know, that's how we have to roll here. We have to kind of have all of these various silos to.
It's soon to be on Trump and Elon Musk's new TV network.
Is that something? Do you know anything about that?
There's rumors.
There are rumors. Apparently, Elon Musk is in talks with Don Jr. about that.
Yeah.
That would be absolutely amazing. Let's hope. Anyway.
All right.
All right, Mike. Thanks a lot.
Until
Pleasure
next
as
week.
always. Talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.